Hello, I'm Will Leach, and a big hearty welcome to the Commission Files. I'm coming to you from Mic 1 in Studio 2 at Commission Christian Radio in Dundonald, Northern Ireland. But wait, who's that over there on Mic 2?
It's Kerry Gregg here, and I'm really looking forward to this episode, Will. It's because we're interviewing someone I've been wanting to get a chance to chat with for ages. Let's welcome Lyndall Bywater to the Commission Files, joining us from our home studio in Canterbury. How impressive is that? Lyndall, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a joy to be here.
You sound amazing. You're up in your attic, aren't you?
I am indeed, tucked up in an attic about 100 yards from Canterbury Cathedral.
Oh.
It's a beautiful place to be.
Brilliant. Now, Lyndall's a freelance writer, a speaker, a broadcaster who knows at least as much about radio as we do. She's an author. She's written a few books, including one about prayer, so we're delighted you've taken the time to join us, Lyndall. Thank you very much indeed.
The pleasure is all mine.
You're in that studio at home in Canterbury. We're here in Dundonald. We can't see you and you can't see us, but it's not because of the distance. You were born blind.
I was born blind, and it was an utter surprise. There's no genetic eye condition in our family, so nobody was expecting it. And I'd been, as it were, sort of out of the womb for about 36 hours, and they were all admiring the wonderful colour of my blue eyes until a doctor said, that's not quite normal. And they did some investigations, and they'd found that I had developed glaucoma before birth. So my eyes hadn't developed properly, and all of the fluid was in the front of the eye, creating a massive pressure overload, which meant it had destroyed most of the function of my eyes. But they were very quick to get in there and do an operation which set things right, but a little too late for most of my sight. But I can see light and dark, and I can see colour, which I'm deeply grateful for. And even that operation was a product of prayer in my life, because the day they were due to, or the day before they were due to do it, they said to my mum, we can't do it because your daughter has an infection in her eyes, so it's not safe to operate. And my grandmother said to my mum, there's a man in town and he's got a healing ministry, and I think you should bring Lyndall along. And my mum, and indeed my grandmother, have never really been into that sort of thing. They were in the Salvation Army, but I don't think they would have been terribly comfortable with a kind of Pentecostal hands-on healing ministry. But my mum was desperate, and they took me along. And a man prayed for me, and he even poured olive oil into my eyes. My mum said she was absolutely horrified. But the next day, the infection had all cleared, and they were able to operate on both eyes.
Wow.
So even that was a moment of miracle in the very early days. And my mum said, she said that she got so depressed for about 6 months after I was born because she couldn't bear the fact that I couldn't see, and she didn't know what she was going to do. And then at the end of the 6 months, she prayed a very important prayer, and she said, God, if my child never has physical sight, I pray that she will have spiritual sight. And I am very grateful that she prayed that prayer, because I've seen God answer that on many occasions in my life.
Already we're getting an insight into just what makes you tick. But there's a couple of things you mentioned there. You talked a lot about mum, grandmum, family, very, very important to you. So tell us about your upbringing, growing up, family, your faith journey, where you went to school. Give us that whole Lyndall story there.
So I grew up in the Salvation Army. My grandmother and grandfather were Salvation Army officers, and my mum was their daughter, and my dad joined the Salvation Army when he was a very little lad, because they came round knocking the doors going, does anyone want to learn a brass instrument? And I think my nan...
They do not. Is that how they do it?
Yes, well, it was then. I'm not sure they do that now, but they did back then. I think my nan
Really?
wanted him out from under her feet, so she sent him and his brother along to learn to play. My dad learnt the trombone, and the rest is history. So they were in the Salvation Army, and me and my brother were both born into that world, and have been attending church in that fashion, had been attending church all the way through our childhood like that, really. I had an interesting time of it, though, because I actually spent most of my schooling in boarding school. And in those days, to get an education that was really comparable to that of my sighted peers, there was no option but to go to boarding school. Nowadays, it's different. Technology means that blind children can have a really good education in a sighted school, but it wasn't the case back then. And my mum was desperate, and both my parents really were desperate that I should receive the education that would give me the best chance in life. So I spent 12 years of schooling in various boarding schools, initially coming home at the weekends. And then after I was about 10, I went to a school where we stayed for sort of 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5, 6 weeks, even on the bounce, and then came home for holidays. So I would say, whilst I absolutely loved boarding school, there is a deep deficit in my heart, and always has been, because whilst I think it can be a very good place, it isn't with your parents, and you lose something that you never get back from doing that.
I was just about to ask you that, Lyndall. How did you cope with the homesickness?
Actually, the irony, Kerry, is I wasn't homesick. I loved it. I think there were about 6 weeks of my life when I was homesick, and that's it. I absolutely loved it, and that's a grace that I loved it. But it is nonetheless true that as I came into adulthood, I realised that I had lost something, that there was something I would never get back. And my relationship with both parents is fabulous, and my brother, have a great relationship with all my family. But there's a deep sadness, which I've probably feel less now since having experienced healing through my adulthood. But there's a deep space and emptiness, which I think those of us who've been separated from parents in our childhood never lose, really, in some ways. But the schools were fabulous, and I joined the Christian Union, and I went to church while I was at school, and I had a fabulous, it sort of added something to my faith journey that I'm not sure I'd have had actually if I'd grown up at home, interestingly. So it had its good and its bad, definitely.
And you had a praying mother right from the very start. I'm assuming your father as well.
Yes, absolutely.
But the fact that they also had to release you and realise that for you to shine, that was going to be the way for you. So it's wonderful to hear that. Lyndall, tell us about your name. I love your name, but I can't say that I've heard of any other Lyndalls.
Well, if you lived in Australia or even South Africa, you would be more familiar with the name because it comes from that part of the world. And in fact, lots of A-level English students in my day studied a book written, I can't remember the author now, but a South African novel in which the main character is Lyndall. But it's not particularly common here. I have to tell you, though, my mum is again responsible for this because I have an older brother called Russell, and I was born in the 1970s when it was very much the thing that your children's names had to sort of go together. You know, you could be Joshua and Jane or whatever. And she couldn't find a girl's name that she liked that ended with the sound ul. And she really wanted something that sat nicely alongside us. I know.
I love that.
She named for my brother. That's what I say all the years down this way. Named for my brother. So she was watching telly one day, and there was a news reporter from Australia called Lyndall Hobbs. And she saw the name on the bottom of the screen, and she just went, "That's it. That's what my daughter's going to be called." So there you are. The rest, as they say, is history. And I have to spell it for everybody. But I do like it. It's. I am. If you Google me, I am the only Lyndall Bywater in the world.
Yeah, we're getting a strong impression of there only being one of you. There's a story about when you were young and you were spreading your wings, but a very determined young woman who didn't want help. There's a story about you out for a walk. Tell us that. My
parents were really keen to help me to be independent, for which I'm extremely grateful. So from quite a young age, once I was proficient with a white cane and I could walk along relatively confidently, they started to teach me routes in my local area. So they taught me the route to church, and they taught me the route to various other places that I might wish to go at the same age that my peers were able to go out, to go to the sweet shop or whatever. One of the routes they taught me was to a shop, and it was on a main road, and walking to it, you turned a corner, and just before you got to it, there was a lamppost that was slightly more inset than lampposts often are. So I was supposed to use my cane quite carefully to make sure that I knew where the lamppost was. So I set out one day with high dudgeon. I was very excited and I wanted to be out on my own, and I'd negotiated this opportunity to give the route a try on my own. And off I went at top speed, not, I have to say, using my cane properly at all. And I walked headlong, literally headlong, into that lamppost. I can still hear the sound reverberating around my head now, some 40 years later. Anyway, I bounced off, as kids do, sort of gave the forehead a bit of a rub, and off I went and got what I wanted from the shop, went home. And I found my mum at home, and she was in a slightly weird mood, and I couldn't quite work out what was going on until she confessed to me that she'd followed me. And she'd walk behind me the whole way because she wasn't completely comfortable. And she'd seen me walk into this lamppost, and she'd had this awful moment of, what do I do? Do I say something? You know, your child has just possibly given themselves concussion on a very hard metal surface. All your instincts are to run and are you okay? But she knew I'd be absolutely furious, so she decided not to do it. And she watched me go home, but it turned out she couldn't keep the secret, so she had to tell me. I was very cross, I have to say, but I understand now why she did that.
I can totally relate to that from your mother's point of view, actually.
Yes.
Having a daughter that has a mother who is protective at times, she would totally get that.
It comes with the territory, doesn't it? And she has ever had to get used to me doing things that I skydive and things like that, and she really finds it tremendously difficult, even
of course
now,
you do.
Even when I'm 50. So there you go.
Yes, we'll come back to that later.
We'll come back. Yeah, this listed in these notes as Daredevil section.
Yes.
Oh, that's exciting.
Lyndall, guide dogs would be a really important part of your life, and I'm a doggy lover, and so please tell us, all us doggy lovers, about your lovely guide dog.
Well, you see, if this wasn't radio, I could get her to come and smile at you in her black Labrador way. She is a black Labrador called Venus. She is absolutely delightful. She's my fourth guide dog. I've had four, and I've had her for about 4 years. So she is wonderful, and she is very bouncy, and she spends by choice quite a lot of time with all of her feet off floor, which is not really allowed. We do encourage a certain level of ground stability in a guide dog, but she does love a good bounce. So she's delightful. She's a very hard worker, and she does a great job. And yesterday she led me all the way from Canterbury through to London, through the underground system, up and down escalators, through the streets of London. She's a very, very talented young lady, is Venus, and all of my dogs have been. Yes. And it's been a real joy to have dogs. I'm all right with a cane. I don't mind it, but from that in fact, before the story of the lamppost, I read a book when I was about 8 years old called Emma and I, and it was all about a lady and a guide dog. And at that point, I remember really clearly sitting there on the floor of my dormitory bedroom at school thinking, I don't know how I'm going to wait the 10 years before I can have a guide dog. Oh. And it was, I longed for it, and I did it as soon as I could, and I've never looked back.
What age can you have a guide dog at?
When I was young, you had to be 17, actually, and I did it at 18 because I lived abroad for a year. So I did it at 18, but you could have one at 17. Nowadays, sometimes the Guide Dog Association will work with younger people. So you could have, if you were in a big school, for instance, and a dog would be helpful to your mobility in the school, they would train you with what's called a buddy dog. And that's a dog that's not a fully trained guide dog, but it's enough just to help you have some independence in the context of mainstream schooling, particularly. I'm sure you have some funny stories about the guide dogs that you've had over the years, and are there any that you can bring to mind? So many. Where do I start? Well, I'll go with Hugo. Hugo is my second guide dog, also a black Labrador, and very famous for an appreciation for eating all sorts of things. Actually, most of my dogs have liked a bit of illicit eating.
Well, they're Labradors, aren't they?
Well, exactly. But Hugo was the past master. It's particularly to do with Christmas. Hugo used to love a Christmas treat. And I will never forget the day that I left home very early. I was working in London, left home very early, and I got on the train. And I had a phone call from my husband saying, Lyndall, is Hugo okay? And I said, yeah, it seems absolutely fine. He said, well, he's just eaten half the Christmas cake overnight. And Phil had cooked a Christmas cake, which was absolutely chock full of alcohol. He doesn't come from the same Salvation Army background that I did. So the Christmas cake was chock full of alcohol, and he'd cooked it, and it was out cooling on the side. And when he came down in the morning, only half of it was left. And I did say, well, credit to Hugo, because Labradors don't normally stop eating. So your Christmas cake must have been absolutely the most filling thing Hugo's ever had if he only ate half of it. But all I can tell you is that dog, and those of you who are dog lovers will be gasping now because dried fruit's very dangerous for dogs. That dog went a whole day. I monitored him very carefully. He went a whole day in London. You would not have known that he'd eaten anything at all. He was absolutely fine and completely normal. And he just managed to subsume this Christmas cake into his body. And Neri, we noticed a thing.
That can take me until March.
I know.
No. We were very impressed. He then, however, got a taste for them. And though we managed to not have him eat any other Christmas cakes, I do remember one year I got some I was doing a ladies' night for church around our house, and I got some lovely gifts that were sort of smellies, but they were slightly festive, fragrant, cinnamon and chocolate, those sorts of things, and I wrapped them all up, and it was the night before, and I came down the day of the event, and some of them had been unwrapped and had unceremonious teeth marks in them because he thought they were Christmas treats, so he tried to eat them, but they were bath bombs and soap, and he got a nasty surprise. And I have to say, I did feel he'd got his comeuppance there.
Yes.
Sounds like it.
I think there's a business there for you in Christmas cakes for dogs.
Yeah, maybe without the dried fruit, but yeah.
Maybe without the dried fruit, absolutely, yes.
Now, you mentioned your husband Phil there and making the cake for you, and that's remarkable because that's a husband that you'd met that you didn't like when you met him.
Absolutely true. No, and that's guide dogs related as well, actually, Will, because Phil was at university with me. We were uni students together, and we were together in the choir and the Christian Union, and we'd really begun, I think, to have an affection for one another. But Phil was a bit of a shy lad, I think, really. He wasn't very comfortable around people, and he wasn't very comfortable around me, though he did like me. And the way he decided to try and show me that he liked me was by being a bit rude about Darby, my guide dog of the time. And so I was walking across campus, and he came alongside me, and he'd say things like, "Oh, she's not doing a very good job, is she? And, oh, she missed that step, didn't she?" Well, it's a little bit like siblings, guide dogs. You are very welcome to listen to me having a go at my guide dog, but you're not allowed to do it yourself. So I got very, very cross with him. And I got back to my room that day, the day that he did this. I went inside my room and I hung my coat on my hook, and I can see myself so clearly now having a holy moment and praying a prayer and saying, "Lord, change my heart towards that man." And boy, did God answer that prayer, because some while later I was longing for him to ask me out, and absolutely joyful and delighted when he proposed to me. That's a very long story that it took to get from A to B, but God did answer that prayer, and we just absolutely hold each other in such high esteem and have loved each other ever since.
It makes it very interesting, though, doesn't it? Because it's about the way you read people. And Kerry and I, and most people listening, I think, are thinking to themselves, gosh, we look so much into how someone appears to us and their body language. With you, it must have been completely different.
Do you know, that's interesting you say that, because my friends at the time, it was one of those classic sort of, young adult friendship relationships, I'd say, where you do it in the context of a community. So actually everybody knew that we liked each other before anything really happened, and I had my confidants and he had his confidants, and we were talking to other people about one another really before we talked to each other about each other, if that makes sense. And my friends all said, "Oh, he's so handsome, oh, he's so handsome," and I thought, it means nothing to me, that, really. I remember being quite perplexed. Why would that be a relevant thing? Anyway, nice to know. But, and also, but a slightly other thing, when we did get together, some people would say to me, "Oh, with a very handsome man." That surprises me for a blind person. I would just sort of blink at them and think, What a weird thing to say. But it's something to do with the fact that it's some of the innate misunderstanding of disability, I think, to be honest with you. This theory that somehow if you were attractive, you wouldn't be with someone who couldn't see you.
Oh, wow.
I think most people realise things go a lot deeper than that, fortunately, though.
Yes, because it's certainly, people sometimes don't say the most helpful things, shall we say.
That is very, very true. Yes.
Well, whilst we're talking about that, you mentioned the attitudes towards disability there.
yes.
And that's a thing I know you care about. Of course you do. It's part of your life. But you must find that people say and do the strangest and sometimes, frankly, the most thoughtless things.
People want to understand you. I went to a coffee shop the other day and I ordered my drink, and it's one of the coffee shop chains where they make your drink behind the counter for you. And so I'd paid, and I was waiting for the service, for the serving lady to do the thing. And suddenly she said to me, and it took a while for me to work out she was actually talking to me. She said, "Shall I just start pouring the milk and you tell me when to stop?"
Right, okay.
So I, as I said, once I worked out she was actually talking to me, because that's something no one has ever said to me before, and I can't even imagine why you would make that suggestion. So I wasn't on it, as it were. But when I worked it out, I wanted to laugh, because I grew up with the story of the do you remember the story of the porridge pot, the porridge pot that keeps pouring out porridge and never stops? All I could see was milk flowing out. I was on the train station, out of the shop and onto the train line, and because I've got no idea how quickly that milk's going to pour out. How would I know when to say stop? So at one level, I wanted to laugh. At another level, I was a bit, well, that's a daft suggestion, but of course, neither of those things am I going to say or do. I need to respond in a way that accepts that she is trying to understand and she is trying to help. So I sort of just said, well, I don't think that's a very good idea, because I'm not very good at guessing. So I think perhaps if you just pour in the amount that you think is right, then I'm sure it will be fine. I can leave the tea bag in for a shorter or longer amount of time to adjust the strength of the tea. And then she was fine. But even now, people amaze me sometimes at the things that they ask or they say. I've had people bend down and talk to the dog when I've asked for information, like, which way do I need to go, or, what time is the bus coming? People do that thing where they tell the dog.
They ask the dog what time's the bus coming.
They tell the dog, yeah. It's not happened to me so much with buses, but particularly with directions. So I'll say, "Can you tell me which direction I need to go?" And they'll bend down and they'll say, "Now then, if you go that way, and then up a bit further along, there's a turning, and if you and I have to stop them and say, the dog doesn't understand what you're saying, and of course, what they're doing with the dog is they're pointing. So when they say, if you go that way, that's absolutely no help to me. So I can't even listen in on the conversation and glean the information
Linda,
I need. So I have to redirect their focus.
All I can hear is Scooby-Doo going, "Hello."
And I'm
what happens. There's the dog looking at them going, "What?"
I'm sitting here in disbelief.
I know.
Do you know
isn't it?
this is actually, I'm just thinking about Strictly Come Dancing, which is a favourite for lots of people.
Yes.
And Chris McCausland is one of the contestants at the minute. And
That's
I have to say, I find him amazing to watch every week. But I also notice he has such a good sense of humour. And that's also what I'm hearing from you as well.
Yes.
You're so gracious. You make a conscious effort of being gracious. Some people might not be.
For the record, I'm probably not always quite that gracious. I try to be, but I think navigating the world as a disabled person is quite difficult, and it's still difficult. I've been doing it for 40 odd years. It's still difficult, and in parts at least, and sometimes somebody does something that just makes it even more difficult. Somebody will direct you the wrong way, or grab your arm. This is if you're a blind person, grab your arm to try and help you get somewhere that is. Or I've never actually had anyone cross me over a road I didn't want to cross, because I'm a little bit more stubborn than that. But people do what they think is helpful, and it can actually be unhelpful and downright dangerous sometimes. So if I'm going to be honest, there are times when I'm not as gracious as that, but I really try to be, because I do accept that the vast majority of people mean well. They want to help. They're trying. And actually, if you said to me, what's the worst thing people ever do, and the thing I find most unhelpful, is the people who ignore me. So if you travel in London, for instance, or in a big city at commuter time, a lot of people are passing you by, and they may well be on their headphones or their phones, or they might be just head down, really, just on their way to work. And I can say, excuse me, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 times, and people just walk past. And that's, for me, far harder. So the moment somebody tries to help me and gets it a bit wrong, I remind myself that at least they've tried, at least they've stopped, at least they've asked me, or they've responded to my request for help. And that's a precious thing. So I try to be grateful for that.
You're listening to the Commission Files. We need to take a quick break.
This is the Lord's anointed.
He was chosen by God to fight for his people.
What's this then? Do you think I'm a dog that you come after me with a stick?
But he disobeyed God and suffered for it.
You had Uriah the Hittite murdered so that you could take his wife. And because of this, your own family will never live in peace.
Commission presents The Seventh Son, the story of David, the shepherd boy who became a king. You can hear this series and a new series every month from the same place as you found the Commission Files. Just search for Commission Radio Drama wherever you get your podcasts.
We're back with the Commission Files, and Will and I are chatting with Lyndall Bywater. We want to talk about prayer because you are really passionate about prayer. How did that all start?
That's a really good question. And the truth of the matter is, Kerry, I don't really know, actually. I remember when I realised it was a passion of mine, but I'm not quite sure how it landed, if that makes sense. I don't think that's often the case with things from God. I think we get given stuff. It's like God delivers something, leaves it in the porch, as it were, and we don't really even know it's there until we gradually begin to unpack it, and then we think, oh, actually, this is something really special to me. This is something that has been given to me as my passion, my calling. And I remember when I was a student, I was part of an interdenominational student group here in Canterbury called 1825, and we were all being encouraged to explore our gifts and to become active in things that we loved and were passionate about. And my thing was prayer. I absolutely knew that by that stage. I was really passionate about prayer, and I remember going to the leaders of the group and saying, can I do a little course? And they said, yeah, no problem at all. What do you want to do? I said, I want to call it the Intercession Masterclass. And with a great deal of love and affection, Grace, the lady I was talking to, burst out laughing. She said, masterclass. She said, Lyndall, don't you think that's sort of selling yourself a little bit high there? Maybe you're 20 or 21 or whatever I was, and you're going to do a masterclass. I said, do you know, I'd never thought of that. I said, what I mean by that is I'm so desperate to learn about this, to learn this at a really deep level. I really want to understand this. That all I meant by I think I assumed God was going to be the master, but all I meant by masterclass was I really care about this. I really want to do this seriously. And she absolutely heard me. And we did indeed call it the Intercession Masterclass, but I was careful to point out to everybody that I wasn't the master. It's a thing that I have carried so deeply in me, but I do wonder now, looking back, whether much of what I lived as a blind person, much of what I lived actually through the breakdown of my parents' marriage. My parents got divorced when I was about 18, so they separated when I was 16. And I think going through really difficult things maybe pushed me back onto prayer in some ways, in ways that I might not have had I lived a different life. So I can see now some seeds from further back, but I know that by the time I was a student, certainly by the time I finished college, I was absolutely mad about prayer, and I have been ever since. I never tire of the subject, and I never tire of talking about it, and I can talk about it for hours and hours, just warning you.
When you take a class, a course, you do some training, you do some insight, what are the main points you make that you want people to come away with at the end of that time?
If you asked me to bring what I absolutely want you to know about prayer, and if you never hear anything else about prayer from me, this is what I want you to hear, it would be quite simple. There would be a few things. The first thing would be that prayer happens, prayer is a thing, because God absolutely loves us with a love that we cannot even begin to comprehend. Prayer is the response of God longing for us, reaching for us, desperate for us. It's really interesting, Kerry, that you mentioned Chris McCausland, who went to the same school as me. Actually, he was there just after I was. I remember him as a very naughty schoolboy, I have to say.
What a surprise!
But what I actually spoke yesterday at a church, and I spoke about Chris because the thing about Chris is learning to dance when you're blind. Lots of blind people never dance. We will tell you we don't dance. We don't do dancing because dancing is massively, and I don't care how many people say dancing is fine. You just do whatever you want to do. It's incredibly embarrassing to get on a dance floor and just do whatever you want to do with no idea of what everyone around you is doing, because there's something innate in the human psyche that we don't want to stand out and we don't want to be different.
I'll tell you what they're doing. They're giving you plenty of space.
That's exactly what they're doing, especially if I'm dancing in any way like Chris McCausland does sometimes. Absolutely. The thing about dance is you do want to fit in somewhere. You do want to, you want to, so we don't dance. So Chris McCausland, we're all absolutely gobsmacked. I don't watch Strictly because frankly, it's really just like watching a program with like a band doing terrible cover versions of songs, as far as I'm concerned. So I've never watched it really, but I am watching it a little bit this time because even though I can't see what's going on, I really want to track with Chris's journey. And what I'm learning from him and his experience is that dancing is a much more intimate process for him. So he touches his dance partner's body to feel what she's doing, and then he allows her to manipulate his body to do the things that she is asking him to do. And there is a closeness and an intimacy, and he's doing it all by feel. And that for me is absolutely what I'm forever saying to people about prayer. This is not something we do it in our minds, in our thought space, but it's a thing that we do in our hearts, with our feelings, with our whole body, mind, soul and spirit. So the relationship of love, the dance of love, being drawn into that is really important to me. And the other thing, I'll just do one more because I know time is of the essence. The other thing I'd say is crucial to me is to pray as you are, not as someone else does. I know so many people who are just heavy under a burden about prayer, that they do it badly, that they don't do it enough, that they don't know how to do it, that they're not as good as somebody else's. And then what they do is they pick up a book from the bookshelf, something like John Wesley's Diaries or something like that, and they read about how a man in the 18th century prayed and how powerful it was and how amazing it was. And then maybe they pick up a book on the Welsh revival and they read about Rhys Howells or one of the revivalists, and they read about how that person prayed down a coal mine in the early 20th century. And then they read maybe Mother Teresa, and they read about her, and they put all of those books down and feel inspired at one level, but at another level just as much of a failure as they ever did. Because who can be someone else? I can't pray like Rhys Howells did. I can't pray like John Wesley did. I can't, because I am me. I can't be someone else.
A very good point, Lyndall. And I think actually it's lovely to hear you say that. You have written books about prayer and about faith, and I certainly have been dipping in and out of them and enjoying them. And
Thank you.
I would recommend them actually to anyone because I find that they're very practical.
The books, actually, both of the ones that you've mentioned, Faith in the Making and Prayer in the Making, came about because I was asked to write by a Christian publisher, by the Bible Reading Fellowship. I write daily Bible notes, and they were looking for some books, practical books on faith and prayer. And so they came to me to ask, which was a great honour. But it is, as you say, for me, it's been important to just put down in those spaces anything I can that helps people think of prayer as something that is easy, joyful, accessible, not always easy, but joyful and accessible, and that is meant to feel natural to us, not something that is meant to feel like, I call it spiritual constipation, where you're sort of straining. I've got to to do this right, Lord. It's not meant to be like that. And I've always tried to write to help release a sense of can do about it all, I suppose.
I think there is an issue with prayer in the Western Church. People talk about it a great deal without doing it so much. And if you look at how many people are at church on Sunday morning and then how many turn up to a specific prayer meeting, far fewer. What aren't we getting? What don't we understand? What have we not just clocked on to?
I'm not sure that's a very easy question to answer. I think that the question about corporate prayer is slightly different to the question about personal prayer. So whether people pray or not has much to do with how free, I think, and how able they feel to pray. So if they feel the weight of guilt that I've just been talking about, they tend not to. Why would you sit down to do something you feel like you're rubbish at? So finding your step, your dance step, or your pace in prayer, finding your natural way of praying is key to personal prayer. That's not the answer to the corporate prayer question that you're asking. The answer to the corporate prayer question that you're asking has a lot to do with what church is for us. So if church feels a little more like a club or an event, then you tend to find people don't really turn up for prayer very easily, because we have quite a lot of events in our lives, most of us, not all of us, but most of us. And so going on a Sunday that feels like the right fit. That feels like the right balance of church in my life, if that makes sense. Maybe a small group where you pray, but that feels about right. Also, it's worth saying we come from some traditions, some of us, where we were, in my younger days, the Salvation Army was like this. You were at church pretty much every night. You know, there was always something on. So prayer was it was seen as something you were supposed to do. You were meant to turn up to. So some people have come from that background. The churches that really do have good attendance in their prayer are churches where people feel like family together. That's what the research shows to us. So if you feel as though being with your church is like being with a family, if it's like getting together with people that you love and feel a connection with and an affinity with, you are far more likely to turn up to an extra thing in the week, because it's not an event, it's a family. And it is true that the family that prays together stays together, and that maxim holds for churches. So where people feel like they belong to a community and they think that the most wonderful thing I can think of for this evening is to go out and hang out with my church family, then corporate prayer becomes much easier. So there's something to be looked at to do with what the culture of church is that we're fostering. And if you are in a big church that can't possibly feel like a family for everybody, then where are the smaller expressions within that of family that people can belong to, because your smaller groups are far more likely to be the place where you pray together.
It's very interesting that you have actually made the difference between individual and corporate prayer. And yes, recently it's been the National Week of Prayer. I'm sure you've been involved in that.
Do you know, it's been a joy of mine. So I've done plenty of prayer at sort of church level, for want of a better word. Locally in churches, I'm always keen to be a part of a church that prays. But I've also recognised that prayer happens at some other levels that I'm very excited about. Prayer happens at the level of nations, regions, even groups of nations. And it's been my delight to be involved in that. I have a particular heart for France. So I've been into France many times praying for France. I'm part of a network of prayer in the southeast of England, so Kent and Sussex. We network for prayer quite often. I'm part of something called Connecting the Isles, which is a group of people who
meet
to pray.
Linked here, isn't it, as well?
Indeed. So we have representatives on our group from what we call the family of nations of the British Isles: England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, the Isle of Man and the Channel Isles. And we get together, largely on Zoom, though occasionally in person, to pray for the nations. So it's one of those things for me. I absolutely believe that, as I've just said about church, prayer and relationship go together. When we feel like family as church, we pray better together. When we feel like family across nations, we pray better together. I've journeyed with that group for a long time, about 20 years now, over 20 years, in fact. And we've been through some interesting things together. We went through the Brexit story together, for instance, and we did not all think the same about Brexit in Connecting the Isles. I'm I'm not a fan of Brexit, and lots of my colleagues on Connecting the Isles are fans of Brexit. And so we had to work out, what does it look like when you actually can't pray the same prayers in the same room? How do we still? And we were so determined that we are family before we are anything else. We are connected in relationship and love and prayer before we are about any issue. And so we learnt together how to honour one another's differences and how to pray together. And I believe that I don't think we'll know till heaven what we've really accomplished in those networks of praying individuals coming together for a cause. But I'm excited by that, and I always know it's effective.
You have a modern language degree. French is obviously one of your subjects there, because you talked about how you actually have a special a place and a heart for France.
So I studied French and German at university in Canterbury. Before I went to university, I finished school when I was 17. So I spent a year in Vienna after my A-levels, and I taught English in a blind school in Vienna. So that really sort of souped up my German good and proper.
Oh, that's a kind of German, Kerry.
Oh.
It's not Hochdeutsch.
I know. I tell you, I still now, Will, I speak German with an Austrian accent. I've never lost that in the last
I speak it with a
30 years.
Hessisch accent.
And I love going to Austria.
Austria's just beautiful. So I spoke very good Wienerisch German for a long time, and I absolutely when I married Phil grew up in Germany, and I stopped speaking German for quite a long time because he just used to laugh every time I opened my mouth. A bit like teasing my guide dog. I was like, so rude. He's like, yes, but you sound like an Austrian. I'm like, I know, there's a reason for that. Anyway, I went to university, and because I'd already been in Austria for a year, they said you need to do a whole year in France to even up your French. So I actually spent a year planting a Baptist, not single-handedly, I hasten to add, with Operation Mobilisation, planting a Baptist church in northwestern France, which gave me a real heart for France. So I do have a heart for the nations, definitely. I then added Dutch for the master's degree, but my Dutch is nowhere near as good as my French and German. I love languages. They're absolutely my hobby. Prayer is my job and my great passion in life, but languages are my hobby.
In your book about prayer in the making, there's a part where you talk about how the king at the time of World War II had called a National Day of Prayer. Yes. And then obviously Dunkirk followed after that, and so many more lives were saved than they ever thought imaginable.
Yeah.
When you heard about that, did that give you like an inner focus there and nudge from the Holy Spirit to actually pray for the nations? Because you have been involved with 24/7 prayer. You've actually been the national prayer coordinator of the Salvation Army. You did that for almost 10 years. You've part of the Canterbury Boiler Room. Yes. There's so many different aspects to your life about prayer, but I'm interested to know if something like that inspired you.
That story is one that I probably didn't know until I was already, on the team, so to speak. I think I found that out quite late. But what I will tell you is that the student group I belong to, the lady who did most of the teaching in that group, a lady called Grace, used to read us stories from the books that she was reading. She would read us stories about the transformative power of prayer, and they captivated me. The idea that a group of people could pray and a whole situation would turn around. There are other stories about World War II. The stories of a community a community of women who prayed deeply, the Sisters of Mary of Darmstadt, who prayed deeply and quite secretly at some stage, because you weren't really allowed to pray in many contexts under Nazi Germany. They prayed deeply and long, and there is a story about how they did a night of prayer and fasting, and very shortly afterwards, Hitler lost his life, and that's a complicated one. What are we saying here about prayer? But I do know that for me, that story really got me thinking, if prayer can make a difference in something as immense as World War II, and again, the Dunkirk story is another one. If prayer can make a difference in these situations, that's something I want to be in on. I want to get that. I want to be a part of that. I think there's a bit of me that loves to see injustice righted, that loves to see breakthrough. I think we all love that, but I think it's perhaps also in my personality that I want to be in that. I want to be a part of that. I want to be making a difference. I am somebody who have a number of things that I've literally been praying into for years, and some of them not seen an answer. Some of them I do see answers at, but it's the long haul, and I'm quite careful about that, because yes, I have been involved in praying for something, and I have been involved in seeing a quick answer. You know, I've been involved in praying for healing for people, and I've seen instant healing from time to time, and I've been involved in praying for situations that have just, you know, changed overnight. But it's stories like World War II that teach me that it does not happen overnight. The Sisters of Mary of Darmstadt didn't just pray one night. They prayed for the whole of World War II, faithfully, at great risk to their own lives, I have to say. And it was a cumulative effect of prayer around Europe that made a difference for World War II. So our ability to dig in for the long haul is probably what I'm most passionate about in that regard. I have been part of the Canterbury Boiler Room for I started the Canterbury Boiler Room with a group of friends. We've been going for nearly 15 years. And for 15 years, we have rented space in Canterbury where we have invited people in for prayer, for friendship, for a cup of coffee, just to welcome people in, to be a space of kingdom atmosphere in the midst of the city. And for nearly 15 years, we have rented buildings. And at no point in those 15 years have we ever officially had enough money. At no point has our income in any month, our regular income in any month, ever been enough to pay our rent. Never. Not once. And yet we have never gone short. I have no idea how that's even a thing. And it is constantly a wonder to me. But it's a sense that God, it reminds me that God is in this, God is doing this. And when you are involved in something that is God's thing and you are praying, that thing is undergirded with prayer, the provision does come, until it will be time one day for that provision to stop coming. And we need to be alert to that and not take it for granted. But that, if you say to me, what's the biggest answer to prayer? It's the fact, partly because I'm chair of trustees, so if the rent doesn't come in, then I'm first in the line for paying it. That is my story of the biggest answered prayer I have ever experienced in my life. 15 years of miraculous financial provision.
You threw a little phrase in ages ago in this interview, and it's now that I'm coming back to it. You said, I've been skydiving. You try things out. You are not a fearful person. It's the same person who walked smack into that lamppost, rubbed her forehead and got up and went on with it. Why do you want to do those things, and what are the things you wish you still could get a chance to do?
I am an adrenaline junkie, so it is true that I love roller coasters. Anything that creates that kind of surge in the system of this is technically impossible, but I'm doing it. The thing I wanted to do when I was little was to fly. That I wouldn't surprise you to know that. I always wanted to fly. It's interesting because I skydived. I did skydive a couple of months ago to raise money for guide dogs, and it's only the second one I've done, and the first one I was so thoroughly exhilarated by that I had no time really to think anything. I was just in the moment. This time, because I knew what to expect, there was a moment so you fall half of the way down, so about 7,000 feet, you fall in free fall when you skydive. So you are literally lying on your front on a cushion of air. There is nothing, not a parachute, nothing between you and
I couldn't
hitting
think
the
of
ground
anything
at that
worse,
speed.
Lynn.
120 miles an hour you are falling. And I just remember lying on that cushion of air, because it actually does feel like you're lying on a cushion of air. And I remember lying on that cushion of air thinking, I am absolutely held here in God. I can't even put it into words, but the sensation of flying and falling and being held by that air was deeply spiritual for me. So there is that. There is something about it which is not just that I am adrenaline junkie. It's something to do with experiencing the extremes of the elements of this creation, which for me are God. You know, they are God's doing. They're God's making, and God is in all of it. And so there is something spiritual, I think, as well. But I just do love the sensation of adrenaline in my system. There's nothing else that really tops that out, I think.
What are you thankful for?
I am immensely thankful for the people in my life, and lots of what I've talked to you about is what I do, and I love all of that. But there's a cast of thousands behind the scenes without which I couldn't do it. Probably not thousands, but there's a cast of many behind the scenes without which I couldn't do any of the things I do. They are my friends, they're my family, they're the people that are not fazed by my blindness, that live around me like a normal person. They don't have the disability hang-ups that some of the general public might have. They're the people that allow me to be myself. They're the people that respect my introversion and let me just disappear for a day because frankly I can't bear another conversation with another human being, and only the dog is allowed in on sufferance. You know, they are the people that enable me. They're the people that give me lifts to places when I'm speaking. They're the people that champion me. They're the people that remind me again and again, Lyndall, just do you, just be yourself. You are the message, Lyndall. You know, don't try to be something you're not. Don't feel responsible for solving the problems of the world. And I am so grateful for that community of people, of friends, many of them Christian, many of them not Christian too, actually, just people who love me and surround me. And they are my deep gratitude, aside, of course, from God, who is everything and all to me. And I don't have words without crying on your radio show to tell you how much God means to me and how much that relationship with God is the absolute lifeblood of who I am and what I live, and that and the people around me. I'm a very, very blessed lady.
You've got 2 new friends in the studio and many, many more
Definitely.
listening to this. Thank you so much, Lyndall, for telling us your story and being such good crack, if we can just introduce that phrase.
Thank you.
I just have loved this time that we've spent together. Lyndall, thank you again.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks everyone for listening. Do remember to follow the Commission Files on your podcast app, and you can find Commission on Facebook. Search for Commission Broadcast Centre. There's our YouTube channel, Commission Christian Radio NI.
We're on Instagram, just search for Commission Broadcast, and we're just updating our website at commissionradio.org.
Kerry and I will be back soon. Until then, bye.
Bye.